Welcome back to the investigative series where we dig through every blade of grass, peer into every grain of snow, and ask questions that even the police sometimes hesitate to answer. Today, we enter part 2 of the Maura Murray case, where an abandoned car in the woods is not only the crime scene, but also the door to a series of secrets that are stranger than you think. Be prepared, because the deeper you go, the more tangled up it gets, like a charger cord stuffed in your pocket. February 17th, 2004. Exactly 1 week after Maura disappeared. A search party waded into the woods, a few hundred yards from the scene, and they discovered something that stopped everyone in their tracks. A trail that looked like skid marks in the snow leading to a hollow. Here, there was a piece of torn fabric, a woman's glove, and dark tracks mixed with ice. The news spread quickly, causing a public uproar. Was this evidence that Maura had been dragged into the woods that night? Or was it just a creepy coincidence? And most importantly, why had these details disappeared from the official report? February 17th, 2004, New Hampshire was covered in snow again, as if nature wanted to hide everything under a cold blanket. Exactly 1 week after Maura Murray disappeared, a volunteer search party with a few officers, the police, entered the dense woods a few hundred yards from the crime scene. None of them knew that, just minutes later, they would find something that would send the already confusing case into a new spiral. As a searcher bent down, the light from his flashlight reflected something dark in the snow. They pushed aside the snow and saw a piece of gray cloth stuck to the ice, like it had been torn from a jacket or pants. A few feet away was a black woman's glove, slightly worn and stained with reddish-brown patches that had turned black from the cold. No one said anything, but every eye knew it could be blood. The news spread faster than the winter wind blew across Route 112. Within hours, the media was there, cameras set up at the edge of the woods, reporters in down jackets, shivering not just from the cold, but from the feeling that they were facing a lifetime story. Locals were talking everywhere, from coffee shops to grocery stores to supermarket parking lots. The story of the blood trail in the woods and the women's glove was embellished, exaggerated, and passed off as if it had been seen by everyone. But in reality, no one but the search party and the police had seen it, and the official report had no details. This is when the chaos began, not just in the investigation, but in public opinion. Within days, the internet, already abuzz with the first part of the story, was ablaze again. Forums like Web Sleuths had created a thread titled Gloves and Blood. The final proof? With hundreds of comments. Some keyboard detectives claimed that the color of the cloth and the glove matched what Maura had been wearing the day she disappeared. Others suspected that it belonged to someone else entirely, perhaps something that had fallen years earlier. When asked, the police simply said, "We are investigating and cannot make a conclusion yet." So the information gap was immediately filled with rumors. Some said the glove had been sent for DNA testing and matched Maura's, but the results were hidden. Others said they had heard from a friend of a search party acquaintance that the glove mysteriously disappeared from the police station. And so on, each retelling added a little salt, a little pepper, and sometimes a whole potpourri. The media couldn't sit still. Local news channels were constantly airing dramatic headlines like "New Evidence in Maura Murray's Disappearance" or "Traces in the Woods," "Clues," or "Dead Ends." Images of the edge of the woods, of police cars parked with flashing lights, interspersed with a portrait of Maura smiling, make viewers both creepy and curious. Meanwhile, at the scene, the search continues, but heavy snow has turned everything into a white maze. Despite bringing metal detectors and thermal imaging cameras, the search team has found nothing of value. Everything only makes the story of the gloves and the cloth even more mysterious, as if it appeared only to defy any efforts to find the truth. Mr. Fred Murray, Maura's father, immediately asked the police to make the results of the forensic examination public, but was met with the familiar answer: "We cannot disclose them during the investigation." This made him even more convinced that his daughter had met with something bad that night and had been taken into the woods. If it wasn't Maura's blood, why didn't they just say it so we could be at ease? Mr. Fred indignantly told reporters, But this silence created a huge information gap for rumors to grow like mushrooms after rain. Witnesses near the scene also began to become the center of attention. Some were harshly questioned by the online community. Some even received threatening text messages just because they were suspected of not telling the whole truth. The police had to issue a warning notice, asking the public to stop harassing the witness, but the effect was almost zero. At this time, public opinion was clearly divided into two camps. The first camp believed that the glove and cloth were the key evidence, proving that Maura had been dragged into the woods and murdered. The second camp believed that this was just a coincidence, even a red herring, bait to distract people from the truth. Both camps argued fiercely, not only on forums but also in real life, at meetings of the community interested in the case. Once, a group of gloves and random happened to meet in a parking lot near Route 112 and almost turned into a heated argument. While people argued, the police continued to investigate a house near where the strange object was found. The homeowner, a man who lived alone, was conspicuous by the recent concrete slab in front of his house. The internet immediately dubbed him Concrete Guy. Although the police said they had checked and found nothing unusual, the name stuck with him in every discussion of the case. That was the power and the danger of rumor. Once a label was attached, it was hard to untag. In the early days after the gloves and the cloth were found, Haverhill felt like a news market, with different people selling different versions of the same story. Some claimed to have seen strange cars parked near the scene on the night of the disappearance. Others said they heard screams coming from the woods at around 8 p.m. The police checked, but they didn't confirm any of the details. And so, everything remained in limbo, just real enough to be believable and vague enough to be unprovable. But what is certain is that, from February 17, 2004 onwards, the Maura Murray case became more than just a story about an abandoned car. It became a story about a glove, a piece of cloth, and a community caught in a whirlwind of hope, doubt, and those early days of chaos that no one will ever forget. Of the stories that mushroomed after Maura Murray's disappearance, one in particular took root more persistently. The story of the house off Route 112, just a few hundred yards from the crime scene. At first, it was unremarkable. A country-style wooden house with a steep roof, paint faded by snow and wind, and a few old cars whose running condition was unclear in the yard. But then, everything changed when someone in a volunteer search party noticed that the concrete in front of the house looked brand new. New here meant not only cleaner and less dusty, but also the bright gray color of concrete poured just a few months ago, while the rest of the house had faded. And so, from that small detail, the online community immediately built a heavy-duty crime drama scenario. Maura had not disappeared into the woods that night, but had been taken to this house, and the new concrete was where the secret was hidden. It sounds like CSI, but this is real life, and the secret makes many people shiver. The owner of the house is a middle-aged man who lives alone, rarely interacts with neighbors, and only occasionally goes to town to buy things. In this area, living a closed life is not uncommon, but in the eyes of netizens, quiet means suspicious. This man, whom the internet quickly nicknamed Concrete Guy, became the main character of hundreds of articles, videos, and podcasts. Some keyboard detectives even searched for his personal information, from land documents to old photos on social media. At the peak, a group of volunteers secretly approached his house to observe, filmed videos, and posted them on YouTube with sensational titles such as, "Is this where Maura Murray was held?" or "Mysterious Concrete Floor," "Clue or Coincidence." The police couldn't stand idly by while a private citizen was being scrutinized, so they decided to check the house. A team of investigators arrived one spring morning when the snow had melted and conducted a search in the presence of the homeowner. Officially, they found no trace of Maura, and the concrete foundation was fine, except that it was newly poured. The reason he gave was both plausible and disappointing. He wanted to replace the old foundation because it was cracked. But for those who had already bought into the concrete theory, this explanation was like offering them plain rice without salt, neither filling nor satisfying. Even after the police declared nothing The chatter continued. Some claimed that the police were just going through the motions, or were pressured by someone to close the case. Some even theorized that the original concrete foundation had indeed hidden something, but had been moved before the police arrived. It sounds like a movie, but in the atmosphere of mystery surrounding the case, any theory is easy to find believers. On the forum, a member who used to live in the area said that on the night Maura disappeared, they saw headlights shining into the yard of this house, as if a car had driven in. However, that story was not verified, and the homeowner himself denied it. But in the world of true crime on the internet, once a detail has entered the collective memory, it will live longer than the batteries in old Nokia phones. Adding fuel to the fire, an interview with Mr. Fred Murray on a local news program showed him expressing doubts about this house. "I can't say for sure, but I feel like I need to check more closely," he said. For the online community, this statement was no different from a hint from the father himself. And so Concrete Guy continued to be scrutinized every move. At times, the story of this house overshadowed other evidence. Despite dozens of unsolved clues, from Maura's mysterious phone call before leaving school to how the car was found, the fresh concrete remains a top topic on every discussion list. Some YouTube channels have created entire series devoted to analyzing the thickness of the foundation, the type of cement, and when it was poured. Some have even hired construction experts to comment on the case, turning it into a free technical consultation. The police certainly don't want to be sucked into this rumor mill forever, but they also know that, with unsolved cases, the public is always looking for something to cling to. And this mysterious house, with its fresh concrete foundation, is too tempting to ignore. To this day, despite numerous denials, the story of Concrete Guy is alive and well on the internet. Every now and then, someone new to the case will ask, "What about the concrete?" As if it were the key to solving any mystery. And perhaps that's the scariest thing of all. When a detail remains unexplained, it lingers like a shadow, clinging to the case, clinging to the public's imagination, and sometimes even obscuring other important clues. In a case like Maura Murray's, where every answer begets two new questions, the mysterious house on the road is more than a location. It becomes a symbol of suspicion, of stories that are embroidered into the fabric of the case. And of a case whose truth is still buried somewhere under ice, snow, or under a layer of newly poured concrete. When someone goes missing, their family often becomes the center of all the questions. In the case of Maura Murray, that was true not only but doubly so, as the media, police, and online community focused their spotlights on each member of the family at the same time. From the very beginning, Fred Murray, Maura's father, became a familiar face on television, in press conferences, and in interviews. He appeared weary-eyed, his voice laced with anger and pain, insisting, "My daughter was a victim of kidnapping. I know it. I feel it." But instead of receiving sympathy, he and his family were quickly swept up in a wave of suspicion from strangers, people who had never met Maura or her family, but who spent hours a day dissecting every word and gesture. On forums, there were topics with titles like "What is Fred hiding?" or "Does the family know more than they're letting on?" Initially, much of the suspicion stemmed from frustration over the lack of information. When the police kept details of the investigation under wraps, the public, especially keyboard sleuths, started filling in the gaps with theories. And in a case as mysterious as Maura's, the family became the easiest target for suspicion. Some pointed to holes in Fred's account of the days leading up to Maura's disappearance. For example, the car accident Maura had while driving his car the weekend before her disappearance. Some suggested Fred downplayed the severity of the accident. Others pointed to his assertion that Maura would never leave, a deliberate attempt to steer the public toward a kidnapping scenario, to keep people from considering other possibilities. And Maura's boyfriend, Billy Roche, also became the focus of attention. Their long-distance relationship was once described as stable but troubled. Emails and phone calls between the two before the disappearance, when dug up, have provided fodder for dozens of theories. Some believe the two argued, that Billy knew more than he was letting on, A television interview in which Billy kept his gaze downcast and gave brief answers has been analyzed and reanalyzed as if it were an FBI interrogation tape. Maura's sister and brother have been questioned for not saying much to the press. The internet, as usual, turns silence into evidence of guilt. Longtime followers of the case say that once you stay silent in an unsolved case, people write their own scripts about why you're silent, and they're often not in your favor. The family's annual memorials have not escaped scrutiny. A photo of Fred standing next to some volunteers at the scene once drew attention to his posture and the way he crossed his arms. In that moment, dozens of pages of comments on the forum about body language and hidden meanings were posted. It sounds funny, but for the family, it was a terrible mental burden. They had to deal with the pain of losing a loved one while also fighting against baseless rumors. In an interview, Fred said bluntly, "We lost Maura. Now we have to defend ourselves from accusations." And then, like a spiral with no way out, suspicions became even stronger when the family did not reveal everything they knew. They said that the police had advised them to keep some information to themselves so as not to damage the investigation. But to outsiders, that statement was evidence that they knew more. Some documentary filmmakers who approached the family were even refused in-depth interviews, raising further suspicions. The online community is divided into two distinct camps: those defending the family, believing they're doing everything they can to find Maura and being traumatized by the media, and those doubting the family, believing that one or more members know the secret of the disappearance. Both sides are vociferous, with an exhausted family in the middle. Ironically, the case has divided not only theories, but also those who share the same goal: finding the truth. And it is in this suffocating atmosphere that the shadow of doubt has become an inseparable part of the Maura Murray story, a shadow that, even when the truth is revealed, may not be able to completely disappear. When a case drags on for more than 2 decades without a solution, it grows, branches like an old tree that is both sturdy and tangled. Each branch is a theory, and in the case of Maura Murray, the tree is like a rainforest in the minds of those who follow it. New branches, new leaves, and the occasional rumor mill crawling about. The first big theory, and perhaps the simplest, is that Maura voluntarily disappeared. This camp believes she wanted to escape her old life, her academic pressures, her emotional troubles, and her personal failings. They point to her email requesting leave from school, citing a family emergency, which never happened, as evidence that she had a cover story prepared. They also point to her cash withdrawals, her alcohol purchases, and her searches for cabins in Vermont. Maura, they say, planned to leave, and that the car crash was an accident, after which she tried to disappear again. That sounds plausible, but the naysayers immediately jump to the gun. If she wanted to disappear, why would she leave behind all her belongings and her phone? And how could she maintain a new life for 21 years without leaving a trace of her finances, social media, or any paperwork? The second theory, abduction, is where the horror stories begin. They claim that Maura was picked up by a stranger or acquaintance after the crash. They point to the fact that the sniffer dogs lost their scent midway through the crash as strong evidence. In this theory, the kidnapper could have used the short time between the last witness seeing Maura and the police arriving to approach and take her away. Some have even speculated that the kidnapper lived nearby, perhaps even in the newly poured concrete house mentioned in Chapter 2. But critics point out that the area was sparsely populated, any unfamiliar car would have been conspicuous, and that a few minutes was too short a time frame for a smooth, unmarked abduction. The third theory, that Maura met her end in the woods or in a remote area, is based on the idea that she might have run into the woods to avoid the police, then succumbed to hypothermia or fallen into a ravine. In New Hampshire, a few hours in sub-zero weather without preparation is enough to end a life. But extensive searches have failed to turn up any bodies or traces, which is why many have dismissed this theory. The fourth theory, that Maura ran away because of criminal involvement, is a thorny one that some keyboard sleuths like to dig up. It suggests that she may have been involved in drug or alcohol smuggling, or that she was threatened by someone she owed money to. Details like her buying large quantities of alcohol, her research into the law regarding drunken accidents, and even her association with friends who were suspected of having criminal records were brought up by this side to paint a darker picture. But there was no direct evidence to support this, and many dismissed it as wishful thinking. A fifth theory, that Maura had fallen into the hands of a serial killer, was fueled by other disappearances in the northeastern United States around the same time. Some believe that a serial killer might have preyed on young women in remote areas. But the federal police never confirmed the connection, and the other cases were very different. Then there were the theories that were so outlandish they made you want to laugh. Some said that Maura had joined a secluded community, like the secret village in the movies, and was living incognito. Others believe that she was hidden from the public eye by a powerful figure for some reason. There are even military-related conspiracy theories, since she attended West Point. Where there are gaps in information, there is room for imagination. What's fascinating and exhausting is that each theory has its own group of defenders ready to argue until dawn. On forums, you'll find dozens of pages of voluntary deserters versus kidnapped, or accidents versus conspiracy battles. At times, people even draw up charts comparing the pros and cons of each theory, as if they were shopping for a washing machine. Every time a new detail emerges, like the discovery of gloves or an old confession is republished, all sides update their theories, trying to fit a new piece into an already confusing picture. In fact, the very existence of so many theories makes this case harder to crack. When investigative resources are limited, the need to test and eliminate a series of scenarios slows things down. And for public opinion, the more branches there are, the harder it is to focus on a specific direction. After 21 years, these hypotheses have not died, but on the contrary, they are still alive and well like a cactus in the desert. They don't need much water, but still grow. And perhaps, as long as the truth is not found, this hypothetical forest will. 21 years have passed since Maura Murray's Black Saturn sat on the side of Route 112 on a bitterly cold winter night. But for her family and those who have been involved in the case, time has flown by almost as fast as a clock. Snow still falls every February. Wind still whistles through the dead trees. And every time winter returns, the memory of that night comes back as vividly as if it were yesterday. For 21 years, a series of searches have ranged from small volunteer teams combing the trails to large-scale operations with helicopters, thermal cameras, dogs, and teams of divers scouring lakes. The result? Not a single solid trace. Each search ends the same way. Footsteps fading in the snow, voices calling Maura's name unanswered in the woods, and disappointed glances returning as darkness falls. Maura's family, especially Fred, has not given up. He's aged, his hair white, but his eyes are as sharp as the first day he spoke of his daughter. He travels everywhere, attends memorial events, gives interviews to anyone who will listen, and always repeats the same phrase. Someone out there knows what happened to Maura, and I'm going to find them. But in recent years, the case has become less about searching and more about keeping the fire burning. Journalists, podcasters, and YouTubers have been churning out content, bringing the case to a new generation of viewers. Some have only known about the case for a few months, but they've already read hundreds of articles, listened to dozens of hours of podcasts, and argued as if they'd been following it since 2004. Technology has also opened up new hope. Modern DNA analysis, digital tracing, artificial intelligence that simulates Maura's route, all of these are being tested. But in a cruel joke, every time a seemingly promising lead appears, it either falls through the cracks or is discarded. The piece of cloth in the woods? No DNA match. Black gloves? Unmatchable. New testimonies? Either contradictory or unverifiable. That's what makes this case so haunting. Not because no one is looking, but because the truth seems to elude every hand that tries to touch it. Theories persist, thriving like weeds, and they're fed by every new detail, no matter how small. Some still believe Maura is alive, living incognito in a remote place. Some believe she died that night, and is buried somewhere near Route 112. Some believe in grand conspiracies, that the truth is being hidden by some force. None of it has absolute proof, and that's why each theory has its place. But alongside the questions about the night of the disappearance, there is another, less talked about mystery: the strange phone calls connected to the case. Throughout the investigation, anonymous calls have been made to the family, to the police, and even to journalists, offering information or hints about Maura's whereabouts. Some of the calls were made in shaky voices, as if the caller feared they were being overheard. Others were challenging, almost taunting. Some calls were made from remote payphones, and others were returned from untraceable numbers. Curiously, some of the details of these calls, if they are true, may be known only to those directly involved. But why haven't the police released them all? Why did some of the recordings disappear? And why, when asked, have the family been so reticent or evasive? There are those who have followed the case and believe that these calls are the key to the truth, or at least to new clues. But so far, everything about them has been a blur. For 21 years, the darkness has been there, but it hasn't been a silent darkness. It's been a darkness of whispers, of whispered stories, of anonymous text messages, and of phone calls ringing in the middle of the night. And if you want to understand the Maura Murray case, you can't miss that part of the story. The part where every call could be a cry for help, a cruel joke, or a piece of the truth. We've walked past the abandoned car, walked into the woods with its cold footprints, stood in front of the concrete house and examined every crack, looked into the eyes of the family under the weight of doubt, and followed every forked theory. But now, to move forward, we must listen. Listen closely, because sometimes the truth isn't in what you see, but in what you hear or miss. If you think you're ready to hear the unseen, the mysterious phone calls, the strange voices, and the information that could change the way you see the case, then move on. This isn't just a story about a girl who disappeared. It's also a story about the sounds that echo in the dark and the questions they leave behind. Watch Maura Murray Case, The Strange Phone Calls, True Crime Documentary, Part 3, where we will decode those bells and see if they lead to light or drag us deeper into darkness.